Hello, guys, and welcome to Fiat Lux. Today on the show, we have Rachel Rose O'Leary from DarkFi. We're here to talk about privacy, talk a little bit about DarkFi, society in general, all the cool stuff. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to talking about DarkFi specifically, and freedom, and like I say, all the cool things. So yeah, maybe we should start on a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you're part of the DarkFi project. Um, what is DarkFi? And like how did this start? How did you get into all of this?
Yeah, sure. So, DarkFi, it's a layer one, which has been custom built for anonymous applications. So you can, using DarkFi, you can create and deploy any kind of anonymous app. Um, and what we mean by anonymity is like, um, we have these major blockchains now at the moment, stuff like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Um, on Bitcoin, it's what's called a UTXO model. So you can track the flow of funds through the network. It's pseudonymous. So it's like when you see a Bitcoin address, you don't necessarily know who owns it. But using machine learning, it's very easy to de-anonymize the flow of funds. With Ethereum, we have a different data structure. So it's what's called an account-based model, where all of the activity is aggregated on the one account. So you could click someone's account and you can see everything that they've done, all the things they own, communities that they're part of, etc. And on Ethereum, like in the Web3 kind of space, there is also an increasing tendency to link these accounts with social media profiles. For example, by putting your name, your wallet's ENS as your Twitter name. Um, so DarkFi is different because it's a UTXO model like Bitcoin, except for in DarkFi, the link between transactions is completely broken. And the way that we do that is by using a trick, which is also used by Zcash. It's how Zcash does anonymous payments. It's called sapling, and it involves a mint and burn step. So you're like breaking the link because there's actually minting on one side and burning on the other. So the so we extend that paradigm and make it programmable so you can deploy anonymous apps. That's the quick version of what DarkFi is. But to answer your second question, like how this came about, um, DarkFi has its origins in a 2013 project called Dark Wallet, which was the first ever CoinJoin implementation for a Bitcoin wallet. And CoinJoin was a or is a privacy technique that involves collecting. We were talking about Bitcoin inputs and outputs. It involves collecting inputs, mixing them up together, and so it's you're instead of just being completely linkable one transaction to another, you have a anonymity set of say five, depending on the implementation, other transactions that are mixed in that your transaction could be part of. It's like harder to know the flow of funds. So contemporary examples of this include Samurai Wallet, Wasabi. They're both CoinJoin implementations. The very first implementation was called Dark Wallet, and it was a collaboration between Amir Taaki and Cody Wilson, who like the 3D printed guns guy. And they first came up with this slogan, which we still use, which is "Let there be dark." And the logo that we have also comes from the Dark Wallet project. The Dark Wallet, it reached a kind of a beta prototype, but then basically the people behind it realized that the the CoinJoin anonymity set is too small. So, like, say you have an anonymity set of five, even if you have an anonymity set of 10, it's still far too small. you need an anonymity set of infinity basically in order to be like comfortable with that. So on DarkFi the anonymity set is actually 2 to the power of 32. And Anyway, so it's a much higher degree of anonymity. That's the depth of the Merkle tree on DarkFi. And so basically in about Amir, like he left, he went to Syria. He was working for many years on uh, testing like different ways to anonymize crypto. So like he made implementations of ring signatures, which Monero use. He made an implementation of Mimblewimble, which turns out is not anonymous. And he did bulletproofs. He made all these different implementations. In 2019, he implemented the first kind of ZK scheme, and he realized at that point that this ZK paradigm was actually extendable, and you can make smart contracts. So it's no longer just about payments or about anonymizing Bitcoin transactions, but it's actually about deploying anonymous apps. So the very first version of DarkFi came about in like 2020, 2021. Uh, and now we're at the testnet phase. So it's been work in progress for many years, and we're really close now to deploying a finished product.
Cool. That's awesome. And yeah, there's a good breakdown. So just because there's maybe a few terms in there just for the like general listener. So you're saying about the anonymity set. I think that's kind of interesting because that'll maybe help people. Let's say if they're trying to get into privacy projects and anonymity. Obviously, it's helpful to know these things because then you can kind of like weed out the ones that you don't want to use because they have a bad anonymity set. So the essentially it's the amount of transactions you were saying that you mixed in with, right? So if it's got a set of 10, that means your one transaction is thrown in amongst another 10, right? Or is there another 9? Are you the 10th?
Could be the 10th, like depends
Okay.
on the implementation.
Mhm.
Like for example, Monero, it's similar in that ring signatures are similar in that they're also using these like these mix-ins. So in a way, you're obfuscating the data with, say 10 other, I think in Monero it's 16 other participants. Um, Whereas, in the paradigm that ZK enables, we're actually breaking the link. So we go beyond obfuscation, and we achieve this state, like what we would call, we achieve the property of anonymity. For our definition of anonymity that we use is basically that link between sender receiver is completely severed. So like a thing is anonymous when the link between inputs and outputs is broken. And that's what Zcash achieves, and that's also what DarkFi is doing in this more kind of generalized setting of zero knowledge smart contracts. And it's worth noting also that we use zero knowledge, but we also plan to support other techniques within our tool chain. So we want to make it so that developers can program apps that use multi-party computation, or different kinds of anonymity and privacy techniques to build like more holistic privacy, and also to extend the possible engineering space. Because zero knowledge is very cool, it's very powerful. We can talk more about specifics of what it is, but it's also restricted. Like there's certain things. It works really, really well in like a peer-to-peer context where you have a prover and a verifier. But as soon as you have like a set of people that need to all like compute a shared state, that's when you start to having to look at like multi-party computation and extending ZK with other techniques.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you expanded upon that, and that was I think that's a good sort of simple way to see the difference between what you're doing and the kind of traditional way that things have been done, and that's sort of obfuscation versus breaking the link. So they're not so what you're doing is breaking the link, as opposed to just kind of hiding amongst other things, the obfuscating. I think that's a good like a simple distinction for people to understand.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a little bit of the technical stuff down. Obviously, DarkFi is much more than some of the stuff you've mentioned. You also have this Lunapunk thing, and you have a bunch of there's a bunch of like philosophies and things connected to it. What else is DarkFi apart from the tools? Could you maybe like explain what Lunapunks are, what Lunapunk is, and maybe just touch on some of the philosophies, and then we can go a bit deeper into them after that.
Yeah, totally. So I would say that DarkFi, as well as being like a blockchain and a set of tools, is also a movement and a community. And I think what unites us as a movement is the idea that anonymity allows us to carve out these spaces outside the reach of the surveillance paradigm. So, I see DarkFi as very much an affirmative project, based on an affirmative and positive conception of freedom, which is that anonymity enables people to create their own destinies beyond the restricted space of surveillance, basically. So that's what Lunarpunk is. I see it as a revival and a resurgence of the crypto-anarchist ideals, but it comes with a critique of cypherpunk and also solarpunk kind of built in. So I guess I should recap briefly on all this punk stuff. We've been just used about like 4 punks in the one sentence. So like it goes back to the 80s, at least the 80s, where we have cyberpunk. And cyberpunk was and is a sci-fi genre, and it's pioneered by William Gibson. It created a vision of the future, which at the time of its creation was very prophetic, because that cyberpunk world that was envisioned by Gibson, it didn't actually exist yet. There were some hints that it could exist, but really he did this amazing work of imagining it, and that also played a part in compelling that future into reality. So he in a way created that future through fiction, which is, I think, a big part of what punk in general, all the punks try to do, is like, use science fiction to create new visions of technology, and through that process actually steer the course of technology toward that imagined direction. So the cyberpunk vision, it's quite dystopic. It's quite individualistic, in that it usually depicts a kind of lone wolf type character who's at war with, the dystopian corporate empire, and it has a lot of cool like psychedelic aesthetics and biohacking and like interesting stuff going on beyond that. But that's like a quick overview. Then, in the 90s, we have the emergence of cypherpunk, which cypherpunk is very interesting. It's a little bit like cyberpunk, but it brings in this element of encryption, and encryption ends up being this. It ends up changing when it's brought in, the technique of encryption is brought into cyberpunk. It completely changes where that future goes, because in my view, it stops being this dystopic story of like the lone hacker war with the corporations, and it starts being a little bit more interesting. It's like suddenly we have this new tactic, that the cypherpunk guerrilla can wield, that is like incredibly powerful, that can render all the heavy machinery of the surveillance state like ineffective. And it's a very simple tool. So it's like it completely restructures the power dynamic that, in a way, in the cyberpunk vision, was quite oppressive. It becomes much more a narrative about emancipation, but still, it's still very much within the kind of American libertarian paradigm of being very individualist, and also um, it's like I would argue that it has a kind of negative conception of freedom, where it's like freedom from certain things, so like freedom from coercion, but there's not a clear assertion of like what is the positive vision of freedom that's being proposed. um so that's where, like, I'm a big fan of cypherpunk was what got me into crypto, and I think many of us are the same inside of crypto. So, like, load of respect for that movement, and I don't want to disrespect it, but I also want to, in a loving way, like, criticize its limitations. And so, that's where Lunapunk comes in. It's Lunapunk is it uses the lunar kind of thing, what do you call that, prefix, um, because also because it contains a critique of solarpunk, which solarpunk emerges in around the 2000s, arguably, and that's kind of puts aside the cypherpunk and the cyberpunk, and it says, okay, how about we try and imagine a future which is like actually nice, and like that's like actually inspiring, and doesn't involve like these terrible outcomes for humanity. Um like, maybe we should put more effort into that, and then maybe that will also help us build these positive versions of the future. So that's what solarpunk is, and it was very influential in crypto, especially Ethereum. However, in Ethereum, it also comes with this kind of naive promotion of transparency, which Lunapunk is very critical of, because we still adopt the cypherpunk dialectic of anonymity versus surveillance, and we see like any kind of transparency centered paradigm as a surveillance paradigm. So we criticize solarpunk on that basis, and we propose Lunarpunk as an alternative, which takes from solarpunk its affirmative kind of future positivity. So basically we take its utopianism, but we also, from cypherpunk, we take this dialectic of encryption versus surveillance. And we also try to propose a positive like vision of freedom, where we argue that anonymity is the means by which people create a new destiny. So it's actually the means by which people can achieve self-determination. And it's no longer about freedom from this and that and the other, but rather freedom to assert a new destiny. And this is also where agorism comes in, like, very heavily to the Lunarpunk narrative. We're very much influenced by agorism, where agorism is about how do we use this technique of black markets to carve out free spaces that are outside of the state. So Lunarpunk is very, very similar, but it expands this operation of like this like of succession of like leaving the state-based civilization to anonymity in general. So it's not just about black markets; it's about any kind of process of going dark that allows us to carve out these new spaces for freedom beyond the reach of the surveillance state.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked that kind of it's like an inverse reframing of the state and free society. So I think most people see free society as like something that's happens outside, rather than noticing that it's actually like present now and happening all the time. So if that makes sense, so it's sort of like we need to break free. That's kind of like how people look at break free from, but um, when it really comes down to it, like people talk about like anarchism as a relationship between people. It's not an end goal, that kind of thing. And so when you break it down, when you actually look at it, like, most of your interactions are free. The state's just like a parasite on top. But in general, like, most things happen freely between individuals. Like, no, we're not being coerced into having this conversation, you know what I mean, or using whatever this platform, or so a lot of these things are free, and I think that sort of like, I don't know whether you would call it inverse, but that's how I'm terming it. This inverse reframing of like, it's not like we don't need to. Maybe it's not as like locked down as you think, because what comes out of that kind of way of thinking is they're kind of like missing the existing freedom that is available, which doesn't allow them to see the possibility, like future possibilities. So because you think the state is all encompassing and that all things need to be measured and bureaucratic and controlled and organized in a certain way, you think like, oh my God, the problem's insurmountable. But it's like, no, like the solutions like here, this conversation is like an example at least of like the way things would work, if that makes sense. So I think like that reframing is actually helpful to make you see like in daily life, like you're mostly like an autonomous individual, like you make your own decisions and like you interact and transact with people freely, and there's a lot of like private industry and things, and like that has nothing to do with the state, and stuff seems to function quite well. Like it's like, what does the state even really do? Like that's like sort of the angle. That's where you want to get to. It's like looking at it objectively. Actually, the state's just like another big corporation that provides really shitty products and services. Like I mean, and that's the light version. You know, that's me being charitable.
Being
Just
nice.
saying,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just me saying it in a nice way. So yeah, I really like that idea, and and also the idea of like living as if you're already free. So I've got a couple of things written down from what you were saying here. So I guess you talked about like privacy and then the surveillance. I suppose maybe we did talk a little bit before the podcast, and I mentioned the example of like North Korea. I think a lot of people view this kind of stuff, like you say the word surveillance, and obviously the reaction from like the average person, I would imagine, is why should I care? Like MI5 aren't coming after me. All the typical sort of like, if you're not doing anything wrong, that kind of thing. And so like, yeah, do you have any, like North Korea, any examples of not examples of surveillance? I mean, you can just point to society in general as it exists today, but things like, for example, like Snowden, and like I'm sure there are some people that almost maybe have like contradictions in their mind. So like they appreciate someone like Snowden or Julian Assange and something like WikiLeaks. But at the same time, they hold the belief that, oh well, if you're not doing anything wrong, why does privacy matter? Like, why do you care about surveillance? Isn't that just trying to go after terrorists and criminals? And yeah, I just imagine that like a lot of people hold those contradictions in their head, but once it's explained. So anyway, the point is, do you have I guess any examples of like how bad surveillance is getting, or like things that people have missed, like why they should care because they're sort of walking around maybe naive? Is there anything that you would think like would be quite obvious, like an obvious reason why they should care, or why it's like
Yeah.
not just for criminals?
Yeah. So, like, I'll be honest, like, if I do get people asking me this stuff sometimes, and like, if they start talking about criminals and what was the other one? Terrorists. Like, I tend to kind of
That's
slightly
right.
back
Yeah,
away
yeah.
because of the fact that it's like there's only so many people you can like.
It's like a 15-year-old's perspective. It's kind of like, I
Well,
don't even want to.
it's just that there's some people that you can convince and that you can get on side, and there's some people that you can't convince, or at least I it's like that Satoshi saying, like, if you don't get it, I don't have time to explain. I'm sorry. It's like sometimes when people are so far deep into state morality,
Mhm.
there's no way that like me personally by giving them the spiel about why privacy is important is going to change their mind. But at the same time, like even for those people who are like who do believe that uh, what the state says is good and what the state says is evil is like actually what good and evil is. For those people, like they can still have a basic understanding that, like, until recently, privacy was basically the default of human life, and like not just human, right? Like all life was kind of unwatched, or just like unsurveilled. So it's only really recently with the advent of like the World Wide Web and the internet that like we've had this capability for widespread data collection and surveillance. So I feel like people are irrespective of the kind of the ethical problems that I see with the framing of the question about like good versus evil and that the bad people should be watched or something. There's just this basic kind of general theme that like never existed before, that now everything, humans, like animals, like everything in the world is now constantly monitored, and the information that's being harvested from that is being used to train AI megastructures that are going to like fundamentally alter the the nature of our world. And there's a very good book on this, which is Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, which I would highly recommend for people to understand. She does a kind of, it's like two-part approach. One is like journalistic, where she tries to analyze like how do these companies like Facebook and Google, etc., operate? What is the kind of the real politics of surveillance capitalism? And then in the second half of the book, she analyzes like, okay, but what's the ideology behind this? And both parts of the book are really good. Like depending on what your interest is, you could just choose one or the other, or just read it all. It looks more intimidating than it is. It's actually quite a short book. Anyway, so in this book, she describes it really well. The whole economic paradigm of technology that we live in today is oriented around data harvesting and collection and analysis. There's no concept of consent. There's only like what I would see as theft, because of the fact that thinking about it economically, this data is has a lot of monetary value, but it's been taken from people without their knowing and without like their consent in any way. So so there's one basic aspect I think that everyone can understand, which is like the question of consent, especially if people realize that this thing is actually valuable. Like people are profiting from their own behaviors online. They're not like, maybe if they don't have the kind of critique that I share of like the way that the state kind of seizes people's ethical conscience and supplants it with like the false ethics of the state, even if they don't share that narrative, they can still understand like, actually maybe I should be getting paid for this because I'm doing this online performance and for free, and everyone else is getting wealthy. Actually, it's creating incredible monopolies that have never existed before, and it's super powering these AI megasystems, which are also being used to like target people in drone assassinations and like other terrifying like weapons aspects or repercussions of this. So that's one side. The second thing is, I guess it's like, people may not be interested in AI or surveillance, but it is interested in them, and they are the subject of that surveillance. So I think it's healthy for them to cultivate like an awareness of that. But finally, like the thing that like kind of my position would be is, and like so that's like the basics, but to go a little bit like deeper and like more a bit more kind of to look into the problem more deeply. You mentioned this thing about society. and people being like, having their own, like people being mostly free, and then the state is this kind of apparatus that exists on top. So, we read a lot of the works of Abdullah Öcalan. He's like been a big influence on many of us on in DarkFi community. And his basic thesis is that you have society, which is like just like humans and in like the way that they are and how they interact. And then you have the state, and the state is basically a monopoly which extracts resources from society, and it separates society from its ability to defend itself, and also its ability to form its own moral and ethical paradigm, and not just to like create and nurture that paradigm, but also to put that paradigm into practice. So it basically seizes their ability to create ethical systems and to live those ethics through politics. So that's where I think the surveillance is really a problem, because surveillance is a mechanism of control that prevents people from having access to those mechanisms of power, like, or empowerment, such as like being able to live their own moral and political belief systems, like to be able to live that effect. So our critique is basically surveillance creates a kind of desert of homogenization where everyone is forced to submit to the same law. Anonymity enables like a forest of divergent communities where people are free to live their own moral and political destinies. So to imagine what are their ethical systems and also to live them politically. So that's the critical juncture that that anonymity gives.
Well, you basically, I thought this was cool. I'd never really thought about it in this like sort of pointed way, but you talked about, you sort of just touched on it then, but you explained it differently in something else I saw, and that was, can you really have your own opinions in
Right.
total surveillance? Because, and it gets into this like idea of the panopticon, right? And also this is something that I think the reason I actually asked the question, I suppose, when you were saying like, maybe like sometimes, I retract or like I get repelled by these kind of like, normal questions or basic questions. I think I'm sort of trying to address, like I said, the people that like are like on the fence. They're like obviously appreciate like, yeah, well, the government shouldn't be spying on us. This is the contradiction, right? Like, so it's like they appreciate people, like there's people that think like, oh, Snowden, like it's bad that they're trying to get Snowden, right? And then they're like, well, what did Snowden reveal? That they're spying on us. But then again, they have the why should you care about thing? And it's like I don't understand how you can have that contradiction of like, why should you care? Yet what Snowden's a hero. Like hero for doing what? Revealing the surveillance that they're doing on us, but you don't care about surveillance. So I don't understand. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to get those fence people. That's what I'm saying. So what they like, more liberal left people, they understand things like social pressure, right? Like this sort of like ethereal kind of. It's not coercive. It's not violent. It's not force. It's not forceful, but it's social pressure. And you brought up the point of, can you really have an opinion? And it's like, well, yeah, you can, but there's also this, it's not quite social pressure, but it's like if you know you're being watched, everything you talk about is going to be measured and you're going to be, like it's not authentic, right? Because you know that everything you say, and because that's like in the back of your mind constantly, you almost never have an authentic thought because of that. Because you're always like hyper aware that like I can't say what I want because I'm being watched. And so I thought that was, that's maybe like a good line of argumentation for the fence sitters, basically. It's like, well, do you like politics? Well, how about not having your own opinion? And also, well, this is another thing. I don't know if you remembered what you were going to say, by the way. The whole thing is based on an assumption that state-based morality is always just. So it's like, oh, well, I'm not a criminal. Well, you might be one day. How do you know you're not going to be a criminal? You're just assuming that they have this like infallible morality and a set of ethics where it's like everything they do is, well, that's obviously not the case. And again, the fence sitters, the people like that understand like social pressure and systemic things, they might not have liked Trump or Nigel Farage. Well, what happens if he gets in and he has MI5's set of tools? What or GCHQ? What happens if Donald Trump decides to use that? Now you understand it. Now you understand that actually it's not just, oh, if I'm not a criminal. It's like, no, you see that if like some guy that gets into the White House or Parliament that you don't like, those things could be used against you just because you whatever it is, you know what I mean? You want systemic change, you're into like Black Lives Matter or something, and then like Trump doesn't like Black Lives Matter, so he's like, these Black Lives Matter is a terrorist, so we're gonna use the surveillance state to stop those people. So I think that's why that's probably a way in to those people. I guess is my point. It's like you can get them at things they care about. But yeah, like you say, that's these are the fence sitters, the people that are like just the complete hardcore, like just blind belief where you'll never reach them. But I don't. Did that help at all? I don't know if the
Yeah, totally. I mean, so I did actually remember
good.
what I was gonna say, but I also would like to respond to that as a separate thing. But so I think you know, uh, people who this narrative makes sense to immediately is generally like people who have been through persecution. So you gave the example of North Korea, like anyone who has like lived experience of persecution by any group or government or any party is like immediately like, oh yeah, anonymity and privacy is like a necessary defensive uh, like superstructure in an era of like data collection. So they like just like immediately get that, and that's where DarkFi is also. I hope we'll come to this later, but like using this metaphor of darkness because the dark is kind of the subterranean world of like the persecuted people, who use encryption as a kind of forest to protect themselves. And also it's like the dark is like we talked briefly, I think, about agorism, and agorism being the sum of all democratic black market activity. And I think Konkin, who is like the founder of agorism, he speaks a lot about drug markets and illegal market activity. And I think that's fair enough. But there's also another aspect to to black markets, which is not kind of considered as heavily by Konkin or discussed as much, which is like the informal markets of like the world at large. So like there is the Western world where we have a lot of like state sanctioned white markets, and then there is like the informal markets of like most of the humans on the planet, which like don't have aren't necessarily state sanctioned and are very agaric in nature. And the kind of global south, the black markets of the global south. And I think that's overlooked a lot by crypto people, and especially people who are asking like, what does but like, why would I need crypto? Because I can just use PayPal. Or if they're saying, why would I need privacy? Like I'm never going to be in trouble. But it's like, actually, when you start talking to people who are outside that bubble, they have immediately, they're like, oh yeah, of course. Like I spoke to one guy from Ethiopia, and he was like, he was saying like Africa is the most surveilled place in the world. Everyone's stealing our data. He's like, of course we need privacy and anonymity. Like, and super interested in DarkFi. The same for like most persecuted people, or anyone who's been involved in these like the informal markets, like the agorist markets of the global south, which is of course like its own black market. And a big part of like the process of globalization is this kind of of trying to like reduce the black markets that are like these like natural markets of like informal markets, and try to hone them in and lock them down and liberalize and keep them within the universalist kind of globalist framework. So it's like this this pursuit, and how I see it as like the light, trying to come in and like shut down the darkness, like trying to So we're about emancipating the darkness, and so that's why we say let there be dark.
Unchecked governments have eradicated privacy and truth. Those who resist are brought down swiftly, but we refuse to submit. Lunapunks are freedom fighters, protected by encrypted shadows. The future we're building is sovereign and uncensorable. The moonlit night is coming.
LunarDAO is an investment fund based on Lunapunk philosophy. Sovereign individuals assemble squad wealth to leverage collective strength, become investors, and allocate funds into privacy projects and anonymity tooling, building a portfolio of supported privacy assets. By this, LunarDAO supports the developing teams, expands freedom and crypto sovereignty, and captures value in the upcoming privacy cycle. Any member can exit the squad at any time. Members are anonymous, hence can build Lunapunk vision without fear of frozen funds, legal implications, or any kind of repression. LunarDAO aims to move to a full Anon setup and expand the Lunapunk forest of encryption, a sanctuary where society can redefine itself, self-administrate and regain its economic, political, and moral agency. LunarDAO also supports research on privacy technologies, listed in the wiki at wiki.lunardao.net, and educational structures such as Adalin Academy at adalinacademy.org, where people can acquire knowledge and master skills in programming and economy while developing a philosophical frame to generate the future path of the Lunapunk ecosystem. The launch is coming soon. Stay tuned and follow Lunapunk Squad on Twitter. Okay. So I think we've just talked about privacy, and I guess maybe it's a good point to sort of segue sort of back to where we started a little bit with the sort of technical aspects. I'm just wondering if you could explain, because it's like, let's say the listeners out there, they accept what you're saying. Yeah, privacy is important. People that are oppressed or marginalized, they that's obviously a necessity for them. So how is this achieved, right? It's through something called zero knowledge, or it's through cryptography. At least zero knowledge is one of those, one type of cryptography. So what is zero knowledge? So DarkFi uses zero knowledge, right? So what is zero knowledge, or ZK?
Yeah. So it's a very good question, because it's been like, in this market that we're in now, ZK is like one of the big buzzwords. So like, it's been used a lot by different projects and it means different things. It's not used in a reliable way. So I would describe ZK, zero knowledge, in the correct way, like in the correct meaning of the term, is like a property. So we can describe something as having the property of zero knowledge. And that, like, having zero knowledge, I will give a practical example. It's in a minute, but first I'll just say in a kind of high level way that it's a way of anonymizing information, like, while still being able to prove the relationship between values. So that's a bit abstract. I am going to illustrate that in a sec. But first, I just want to say that ZK is used a lot, especially in Ethereum kind of ecosystem. We hear a lot ZK rollups. And it's important to emphasize that is, they use the word ZK, but these rollups are not zero knowledge. They don't have the property of zero knowledge. There's two, so there's basically, in the landscape of zero knowledge proofs, there's two things you can do with a ZK proof. You can compress information into a tiny format, so it's what a property what's called succinctness, or you can hide information and like achieve anonymity or zero knowledge. So basically, with the succinctness, it's just a proof. It's not actually ZK. So, but it got called ZK because in the zero knowledge cryptography like design space, we have these properties like succinctness, but you can do succinctness without doing ZK. So what these rollups are is basically they're succinct proofs that something happened. So you can like prove the entire the entire Bitcoin blockchain in like a single transaction, just like one proof that says like it happened that way, and it's like for sure, there's no way, it's non-contestable. So you can do that kind of thing, and that's what the ZK rollups are doing. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify, DarkFi is a different kind of ZK. It's one that achieves the property of zero knowledge. So what do we mean by this property of zero knowledge? So many people, when they give analogies, they give metaphors, they start talking about caves, and I'm not great on those metaphors, but I'm not a cryptographer, I'm a programmer, and my favorite example from of ZK is a programming example. Probably because it's like just like the easiest for me to understand, but maybe other people are like me and they think in this like step-by-step way. So basically, my favorite exposure to ZK was I wrote a demo smart contract using the DarkFi smart contract architecture, which we can talk about later, but it's basically a way to create and deploy anonymous apps. And in like a few months ago, I made a demo version of an app, which is not an app, it's just a contract, but I made this demo thing because I wanted to show other devs what the process of the smart contract architecture was doing. And what that contract was, that proof was, we use these words interchangeably in DarkFi, is to prove a relationship between values. So it was to prove A plus B equals C. Now you can put any numbers in there, but it has to satisfy that relationship. So you write out A plus B equals C. So we can say like A is 2, B is 3, C is going to be 5. So we have this proof which enforces that relationship. So it says like undeniably A plus B definitely equals C with like no questions. Like proof says so. Like, so we know it's legit. However, aside from like giving us that information that yes, the relation is true, A plus B does equal C, this kind of method doesn't require us to reveal the values A, B, or C. So we're proving the relation of these values without actually providing those values. So yeah, imagine A plus B equals C, but without revealing any of the values, just revealing that the relationship with those values is deterministically true, like with no doubt about it. So that's like a very simplified version. But basically we can use this as programmers in a highly extendable way. So we can use this to do anonymous computation, basically. So we can run algorithms where the output of the algorithm is like deterministically true with no questions about it. It's like it's verifiably true, without knowing any of the values. So that's like the basic property of ZK that we use in DarkFi to achieve anonymous transactions. And we talked a little bit earlier about DarkFi, but I didn't mention that on testnet we have transactions. We also have anonymous swaps between any currencies, and finally we have anonymous DAOs. So these are the kind of techniques we use. Is like we can have these values. The only person who actually knows what those values are is you. The only thing that the blockchain knows is like that things happen correctly, but it doesn't share any of the actual values themselves.
Okay, that was great.
Okay.
I think maybe want to go back a little bit, just to, because I think maybe we've covered like enough of the sort of technical side. Not that we can't talk a little bit more about some other stuff, but just to sort of round it off, I guess. The idea of kind of the Lunapunk, the imaginaries, basically.
Yeah.
And because you did talk a little bit when you talked about the different punks and things, and kind of sci-fi, which is a really interesting topic in itself. At least it's sci-fi's relationship to technology. So I guess why do you use these imaginaries? Because I could see from the outside world, the sort of like even the term like punk, like Lunapunk, it's like seems like a bit goofy. It's kind of like what's going on? Like why are they like pretending? Like what is it? Is this like LARPing? Like I don't. But I think when you understand like the relationship between like sci-fi and technology, and also in some sense, you're in and I hate to use this word, but it's almost like like people talk about manifestation. You're like bringing it into being. You know what I mean? You paint, you bring it, you're putting the future out there, and then you it's like an attractor. You're pulling yourself towards the or pulling yourself towards the future, or pulling the future towards you. One of those things. But yeah, so I understand why it's important. I guess what do you see? What do you see being the main importance? Is it just a psychological tool, and then that's like valuable because, I mean, look at like Christianity or Islam, like these like mythos lasts for thousands of years and are incredibly valuable and contain within them the values without even having to explain the values. Like you can like embed metaphors and symbolism and all that kind of stuff. Like it's obviously it's like an archive of knowledge basically. In a way, it's I suppose it's not like a roll up, but like in the same way, like it's condensed information. Then you can unpack it through the symbols and stuff. You don't even need to directly state things. So in a sense, it's almost like obfuscated, or not quite anonymous, but it's like obfuscated information. It's like you can sort of embed information and extract sort of like deeper concepts from this overall mythos or imaginary, I would imagine. So I'm guessing that's maybe one of the reasons why it's important. Also, sci-fi is just has been known, and this is the case, right? Like a lot of sci-fi writers, all the great films people love, Star Wars, The Matrix. I mean, especially something like Space Odyssey. Like the things that were thought of before they even existed, and some of these like classical, novels and films. I don't think people are aware of how influential sci-fi is. Like people imagining things. Like I think people maybe get the impression that like the way that history's gone is like more so it's like just scientists in labs and like geeks and computer programmers, and it's like it's actually not. It's actually like these like weirdos that are making like sci-fi novels about crazy futures that exist 200 years in the future and things, and then you get the geeks that read those things and then draw inspiration from that, and then they're the doers, like you have like the people that sort of are the creative people, and then you have the engineers and the technical people, and they're like when they're fused together in some sense, that's when you get the new thing. So just to actually ask you the question, why is the imaginary important? Why are you not just LARPing?
Yeah, totally. So thanks for that question. And like I think you raised a lot of interesting points there. The thing that strikes me about what you said, and I don't know if this directly answers the question, but we can kind of approach it in a kind of roundabout way, is like this notion that technology is like people have like misconstrued notions about how technology is actually created, and I think again, to talk about that book Surveillance Capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff does a really good analysis of what she calls, I think she calls it like the dispossession cycle, which is like the way that people get numbed over time to the notion of like surveillance and data collection. And she argues that the way that Silicon Valley has kind of propagandized itself is as this version of technology that is like inevitable. So it's like it's like technology is like this inevitable arc, this like progressive trajectory that goes in one direction only. And so it's like, yes, there are downsides to surveillance, but it's like there's nothing we can do. It's just like how technology has gone, like that's just like the will of the of technics. And like it's interesting because you also come across this idea in philosophy of technology, this notion that the development of technology is something autonomous that is outside the control of humans, and that in a way we're just like subject to these processes of like technological development, like they happen to us
What was it?
rather
The
than
McLuhan sex organs of the machines or something, machine world or something, that kind of idea.
yeah, that kind of vibe. And so that it's happening to us, and we're subject to that rather than being like agents that are actually able to direct the course of technology. And it, like when I first got into crypto, I was very interested in Nickland. And I also through like reading some philosophy of technology, believed that technology was something that's happening to us. It was like this inhuman process that was proceeding like outside of our control and kind of irrespective of our desires or our intentions. Um, However, it was only when I became a programmer that I was forced to reconcile with like the deep subjectivity of programming and like the incredible in a way path dependency of like individual choices that programmers make. So it's like the individual and I think it's similar. Okay, so we're going to get a little bit bring in some biological metaphors, but I think it's similar to how animals evolve in nature, where when we look at like predators and prey, like for example, if you look at like a T-Rex, and a T-Rex is this like incredible optimized predator with these like huge back legs and like a massive jaw, and he's just like he's fast as fuck and he can like munch you like nobody's business. Like he's a really tough predator, like you wouldn't want to fuck with him. And when you look at his prey like that he was living off, they were also like heavily armored, they've got all this like fucking armory around their heads and they're huge, they like massive, they got like clubs on their tails and all like
Spikes on the back and yeah.
yeah, exactly, like lumps and shit. So that there's like they're heavily weaponized, and there's something called the Red Queen hypothesis, which argues that like these two forms of weapons and like specialized weaponry developed in relationship to each other. So like the prey have to have these armory because uh the predator has this like incredible weapons as well. So they kind of co-develop, and technology is very similar in that when we have people working on technology, they build kinds of technologies that are reflective of the environments and the context that they're in. So I think they much more have they embody this kind of evolutionary dynamic of like become like concretely reflecting the context that they're part of, rather than this other version of technology which is imagined and projected by big tech, where it's just like there's just one direction. So it's much more like an evolutionary process, which is subjective, which is like culturally specific, new, and all this nuance, and like as well as being part of a context, it also has like the will of the programmer who's involved, all these choices. Anyway, so having realized this is also where I kind of began to devote myself more in a more hardcore way to anonymity, because I was convinced then that like this is a cause that's like worth fighting for, but also like that can win, that like actually you can change the course of technology, you can like create new spaces for freedom, rather than this like dystopic scenario of like surveillance just becoming more and more total. But sorry, like that was but I do want to answer your question. So about the importance of imaginaries, you know, people. So again, it's like before. So people have these ideas in their heads that direct them towards to do certain behavior in a certain way. Like before, when I was very much interested in Nickland, I was in this very kind of passive role of just like writing about technology at the time. I was like, I just have to accelerate this trajectory of like technological development at the expense of humanity. So I'm just going to write articles that like spread the word of like the technical thing. So that's where like I started writing about crypto. But then like the kind of more agency centered approach is like actually I'm going to become a programmer and like learn to wield these tools and like to create new futures. And in order to like make that shift, I had to have a story in my mind in which, you know, engaging in that kind of activity and that with that level of agency was actually worthwhile and like actually was gonna like how to say was gonna actually go somewhere, you know what I mean, like it wasn't pointless, but it actually had a possible outcome. So I think stories, you know, like the ones that we provide in DarkFi is like a way to inspire people en masse to work collectively towards a common goal. And you know, for us, it's about creating an alternative narrative, which is outside of this one of like, oh, the state is all pervasive, you know, there's no other possible future. There's just the future is cancelled and it's just like surveillance and like the surveillance state forever, which is like very dominant, right? Like it's very dominant. So that's where science fiction is like, no, how can we actually create new possible futures? And as you said, like through that act of like imagining these futures, also somehow um make them more possible. Like it's an attractor that generates a future.
Okay, yeah, no, that was great. I do have something I want to speak to because we talked about the kind of dark or negative connotations that maybe people see. I want to get to that next, but I have a bunch of
Cool.
threads. If you just give me a minute, I'm going to tie some things together. Because you said a lot of things there that were interesting. So I just recorded an episode with someone from Nostr, or from the Nostr community, and we had this like similar discussion about how it's like evolution, and we sort of talked about it's funny how it's actually kind of the irony of this is funny. It's funny. So people view, like you were talking about, you know, the surveillance paradigm, and how like this inevitability, right? Like, oh, it's just the way technology is, and it's just going to increase. The surveillance is just going to, you know, it's just going to get worse and worse. And obviously, you know, a lot of that's to do with like monopolies and proprietary software and things like that. And like you mentioned, you know, the Silicon Valley, and the, you know, big tech. But I think the irony is the free community oriented side of technology is weirdly actually more ruthless and more natural. It's more nature like, right? So like, because the thing is, anyone can contribute, right? It's like natural, it's organic. Just like in a community, anyone can like help. If you know, Joe wants to like, you know, take some buckets of water to somewhere, you know, maybe I'll help you do the buckets, you know, whatever, or you contribute in some other way. I'll cook the food, so when you get back and you're tired, you know, you've got a meal, that sort of thing. But yeah, what's kind of funny is that it's highly competitive because the sort of in these communities, that because the ethos is like open, right? It's permissionless. That means anyone can compete. So there's more competitors potentially. Also, someone can fork your code. So if your idea isn't solid, if your project, product, service, whatever you want to call it, your code, if it's not good, right, and it doesn't stand up, someone's just going to fork it, make it better, and then their thing will win. And actually, it's unlike the sort of monopolized big tech, they have all the control over it, right? It's really hard to compete. But in the sort of like decentralized open source kind of world, it's the opposite. It's extremely easy to get involved. It's easy to make a competing product. And it's also easy to contribute. I think it has both ends of the extremes. It's like open and free, and there's, you know, people want to help and contribute and get involved and help and organize together. But on the other end of that, it's like if your project's shit, like it goes straight to the recycle bin. it's there's like think how many things have just been left in the dust on GitHub. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting that you touched on the evolutionary process, and it's also organic. The way I described it in the previous episode, I was just talking to the Nostr guy. It's kind of like this, like sort of proprietary software and big tech. They have this like narrow kind of linear path, like version 1, version 2, version 3. Whereas open source software, where people can contribute and add things and you know, govern. Essentially, that it's more like, as you said, like organic. It's like cell division. Like a fork is like a cell divide, and essentially, and it's a completely different evolutionary path. So it's a really good analogy. You know, I really like using the evolutionary process as a you know, analogy or metaphor. So and to speak to the trajectory thing of you know, like why, like it's inevitable. And this also links to the imaginary thing. One of I'll give an anecdote first. I remember it wasn't my first interaction with Linux, but I remember it was one of the mind-blowing interactions. Like I've had a computer in my room when I was 8. Probably learned about Linux at like 11, 12. You know, run like I'm not like, you know, an expert or anything like that. In fact, like I'm really bad with Linux. Like I'm not a great programmer or anything like that. I'm just like super nerdy. I got into computers. I got lucky, you know. I was like always interested in tinkering and stuff. So obviously Linux Kit was like, oh, you can install a different operating system. There's like other operating systems. There's other web browsers. Oh, cool. There's other, you know, all these things start to open up. But funnily enough, the one thing that like really broke my Linux cherry or popped my Linux cherry was like my friend lent me his PlayStation. He had a PlayStation 3, and that runs on Linux. And back then, Sony was kind of cool. They were like, you can run Linux. There was actually in the options menu, there was an option to install Linux on your PlayStation, which I thought was super dope. They removed it obviously in later versions, but that was super cool, man. That was like, wow. But anyway, I was trying to play some game. And like it was like some webcam, like you had to use a webcam or whatever. I don't know if you remember. They had like these silly like iToy. Do you remember the iToy? You ever heard the iToy? It was for like the old PlayStation.
I remember.
So it's like you play games with your camera basically. So there's one called like window cleaner or whatever. So you just like wipe the things off screen and you clean the window basically, and it scrubs all the mist off the screen, and then you've wiped the window and you complete the level. Anyway, I wanted to use a webcam, and my friend said, "Oh, just plug your webcam in." I went, what do you mean? It's a PlayStation. I need to buy the PlayStation cam. And he goes, no, that's not how the PlayStation works. And I was like, what? What do you mean that's not? What do you mean I can just plug something? Yeah, you can plug a keyboard in as well if you want, and a mic. And they don't need to be Sony mic. They don't need to be Sony products. And that just blew my mind. I was like, wait a minute. You can tell me I can connect like any of my existing devices. Not only is that super cool just because like it's cool that you can connect, you can like daisy chain these things to daisy chain technology to make like almost a new technology in a sense. Not really making a new technology, but you can create something new. Because I might plug a webcam into the PlayStation that's no one else has, and that's a completely unique setup. I have the PlayStation that everyone else has, but my peripherals could be completely unique. So I've got my own unique setup. That's really cool. But it's also extremely liberating, right? Because I don't have to pay Sony or friggin' Apple for their proprietary, you know, headphones or earphones or whatever. And like maybe I don't have the money, but maybe I do have a spare camera lying around. So it's quite liberating for just people in general. Like it's economically liberating. So I thought that was cool. And yeah, I just want to throw this in there because I think this is like probably a cool video of Amir had mentioned it. He talked about this like Unix documentary on YouTube.
Yeah.
And this kind of coincides with what I was saying about the PlayStation thing blowing my mind. I watched the Unix documentary, and it gets to this part where they're creating a spell checker, I think, and so that they're having to like cross check like the text in the program against a dictionary that they've already built, and then they explain this like idea of pipelines, and it just hit me. I was like, holy shit, this is like the DeFi money Lego block thing. I was like, but like 30 years ago, like this is the same thing. Like literally, it's the same. It's not like technically it's not the same, but conceptually it's Lego blocks building on top of each other, and then you can go laterally or like horizontally or vertically. You can build all these things together. You can stick things together like Lego blocks. And yeah, so that just speaks to what you were saying about this trajectory. Like most people I would imagine are exactly how I was. I was like, okay, if you have a PlayStation, you need the PlayStation webcam, you need the PlayStation keyboard and the PlayStation this. But that's actually not the case. We actually can create things where like technology, we can daisy chain things that we already own. We can connect them together to create new forms of technology. But like, yeah, I think that's sort of exactly what you were speaking about. Like people don't have that example to draw from. It's just like, oh, we're screwed. That's just how it is. But actually, we could have this whole world of like interconnected technology, and like information throughput and just like yeah, it's just a different world. And so I thought they were good examples, especially the Unix. Watch the Unix one, guys, if you're at all interested in this stuff. I think it's AT&T, was it? AT&T Unix documentary. Yeah. Look for that on YouTube. And just look at how they talk about the programming that they're doing and how they explain the super simple pipeline concept. And again, once you understand this stuff, you almost can't go back. Once you like see how good things could be, you realize like how shit Microsoft are and how shit Apple are, and actually how restrictive and how they basically rape you financially when you could have, like I say, like you could be using things that you already own to serve you. You could use the technology to serve you in different ways, but they don't allow that. But people just think that's how it is. Oh, well, the code's complicated. Like, of course you need the Apple display because like it has to work with the Apple stuff, and it actually doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think obviously that also relates to the design philosophy in DarkFi to sort of bring it back to DarkFi, the simplicity, and just the way that you can like build upon things. So yeah. Now I'll ask you about the DarkFi vibe, I guess. Do you want to speak to the kind of idea of darkness and why you kind of maybe see it as more of a positive than it might look from the outside?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to write an article about this because I think it's an important point. It's easy for people to misconstrue what we're doing as I mean, I don't see DarkFi as negative or even darkness as negative, but rather being like an affirmative space and a generative space. Thinking more like metaphorically as darkness in relation to life and to forests and even to deep space or like the deep undersea.
What about the mind? The mind's generative. Thoughts come out of the darkness.
Under earth. The mind. Sorry, I thought you were minds, but those two, like subterranean, but also the mind, and so that's kind of where I'm drawing from. But then there's also like a kind of deeper point, which is this notion that there is a kind of a civilizational narrative, which is the language, the narrative of kind of similar to this thing about technology. We said there's a propaganda about big tech, which is like technology is just one arc, which is like one progressive arc that has only one direction. And it's similar with technology. It's like, with civilization. There's an argument that people have, which is like it's just a progress from darkness into light. and it's like a unidirectional progress from like backwards, societies to these modern enlightened societies, and they talk about enlightenment as being like part of that. But we're of the perspective that actually that this is like a false narrative. This is a propagandistic narrative which conceals like a disdain for the traditional society and the natural society that existed before, and that is like propagandizing the civilization that we have, which is only one kind of civilization. It's just one example of many different types of possible civilizations, but it's trying to create this false belief that the civilization we live in, that we would call state-based civilization, is the only kind of civilization that could exist, that it's like the perfection of civilization, it's like the perfection of human activity. Whereas we see like actually in these like alternative civilizations, these in the kind of underbelly of civilization, the alleys and the crypts and the kind of the underside, that's where the latent potential for new forms of civilization, what we call a democratic civilization, can emerge. So again, and we look to the darkness to find that potentiality, as the darkness being like a place of fertility and rebirth, kind of like the soil inside of a forest. So like where do we look is like anywhere subjugated and persecuted, the kind of blind spots of the civilizational paradigm. And also like we look back in time to the darkness of an earlier age, which prior to like this form of civilization that we have emerging, even 10,000 years ago, like it's the kind of civilization we have now. According to Achelan, it emerged in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. But way before then, there was different kinds of civilization which had different logic, and that didn't involve centralized militaries and the monopolization of resources by the state. So that's for us. That's also darkness, and that's what we're trying to like uncover and like within our own research to kind of to learn from these other kinds of civilization. But it's important, and I've spoken about this before in another talk, but I want to break this down in more detail in an article. But what's important is like actually there's this dialectic which we kind of spoken about here, which is like the civilization and the democratic civilization, which is also light and dark in a way in this the way that I'm presenting. What's important is that we don't get stuck within this kind of master slave situation, because what we know from philosophers like Nietzsche is that if we have a master slave dialectic and the slave seizes the power of the master, it basically just perpetuates the cycle of enslavement, which like that's the outcome we want to avoid. So we actually want to do away with that distinction, and the way that again, like looking at Nietzsche is like like definitely one of my favorite philosophers. He actually offers solutions for like how do we avoid what he calls slave morality. So like having this being like trapped in the aesthetics of negativity and also the politics of negativity that defines itself as the opposite or the adverse of the dominant paradigm. Because the risk is if you stay within that mirroring relationship, you end up just being like a shadow replica of the thing itself. And so that's why we're also trying to create with Lunapunk these affirmative narratives and these efforts towards like actual world building and actual like trying to like prefiguration, I think it's called, like trying to actually envision and create alternative paths and alternative forms of civilization beyond this paradigm. So it's not just about the slave becoming the master, but it's actually about transcending this dialectic and like initiating, like creating new value systems, new forms of civilization. And so the weird paradox of DarkFi is that even though DarkFi is using this aesthetics of dark and etc., it's actually internally, I think, very colorful, you know. And we're going to start to see this, I think, more in some of DarkFi's like aesthetics that it's promoting. It's like there's actually a lot of color, because what we're trying to promote is a shift away from this desert paradigm of like masters and slaves towards a forest where this dialectic has been transcended and people have like the freedom to create new futures.
Yeah, I think no, I'm glad you expanded upon that, because I can see why it's necessary, and you know, thinking about the sort of the darkness, and how it kind of has this negative connotation. I guess you could see how people might also perceive it as like you're running away and hiding because you're running into the darkness. You know, you're hiding in some way. But maybe like a better way, this is a bit silly, but it's kind of fun, I suppose. A better way of looking at it is more like a ninja, like still badass, but like concealed and like anonymous. You can't see his face and they're all blacked out. But the ninjas ain't hiding; they're coming for you. You know, So yeah, maybe that's a way to reframe it. And yeah, the like you said, the sort of like having a kind of a positive view on it. Like I think at least personally, maybe when I first started thinking about these concepts, maybe there was more of an element of like, oh, I need to break free from the state. And it's not that isn't still an idea, but now it's come to a point. I think a lot of people get to this point. It's kind of what I think what you're pointing to is you sort of start to internalize it, and once you properly internalize it, it's not a thing that's out there. Again, like I said earlier, this is a thing like people think they need to like break free from it, and in a sense you do. But it's all about the psychology of how you view it yourself, right? It's not. I'm talking here about like not saying we don't need to, you know, kind of like fight off the state. That's not. But it's not the internal fight is different. That to me is the point. It's like I don't walk around thinking that I need to break free of the state. I just exist as a free being, and that you're gonna come and you have to come and stop me. It's not the other way around. Like I'm in this like constant war. Like, oh, I'm trying to break free. It's like, no, like I am free inherently. And like if you want to be weird about that and come and try and like stop me, like be my guest. You know what I mean? Like that's I think that's kind of the at least how I look at the sort of like positive you know, way to look at things. So I know we've run for an hour and 20 minutes now. I know you said you had things to do. Is there anything that you want to get out there? Is there anything that you want to talk about before we wrap things up? Is there anything you think we've missed?
No, but I'll just say, like, you know, we have this, like, you had Paul, Dylan, Ennis as a previous guest, and myself and Paul, with some other anonymous contributors, we work on a journal which is called Agorism in the 21st Century, and you know, we're in that journal trying to provide a space for people in crypto to kind of air these like more philosophical discussions about like you know, what is crypto, like where's it's going, you know, like what is the direction, like what is our vision and what is our proposal, so trying to provide a space for that, and also so I would direct you guys to the website. It's called agorist.xyz. I don't know if you can link that or something on the
Yep.
thing. But also, you know, dark.fi is our website. On there, you can find links to our docs, our GitHub, and also our blog, where I hope that, you know, when I write this article about, I'm planning on calling it Against Negativity, which is kind of a joke because it's also like in a way, like a double negative.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I think it's a really important point because like we're actually in an important I would say, cultural shift where people are looking for, they're seeking affirmation and, positive, like motivating stories. They don't want to be stuck in this like critical or like, um, like purely subversive for the sake of subversion kind of paradigm. I think we've lived through ourselves like this as like, I guess we're probably of a similar generation, but we've lived through this shift like within our lifetime away from like the kind of like uh yeah, I guess like the more emo vibes of like the adolescent like adolescence vibes of people being like into darkness for darkness sakes, to people being like, oh, actually, maybe darkness, contains the seeds of a new future. And I guess that's the point that I would like to drive home is like, I see darkness as being a transition. Um, and the moon is also a really kind of evocative symbol of that, like transitionary period. Like from one which like that we're in now, where there's I think a lot of negativity, there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of confusion, to a new paradigm which is enabled by these technologies that we're working on in crypto. That is the kind of like the new dawn that we're working towards. And so yeah, the dark is a kind of transitionary symbol, as is the moon. And interestingly, before we started recording, we spoke about Celts. Celts were people who measured time in nights rather than days, and also like they had a lunar calendar system, like rather than a solar calendar. Just an interesting historical anecdote. So yeah, that's it. And also I talked a lot about DarkFi's blockchain based apps, but we also have other apps for anonymous communication coordination. So like check out our IRC. It's a peer to peer anonymous chat, which is like I think the most anonymous chat that exists at the moment, because it doesn't have a concept of identity at all. So like unlike Signal where you've got phone numbers, even the same Telegram, you need a phone number to join. Even if it doesn't, you can hide it, which is better, but like it still has an identity. On our IRC, you can change your identity no matter how many times you want. So it's like fully anonymous and encrypted and peer to peer. So like probably the most badass chat. Encourage everyone to join. And yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome. I've really enjoyed it. And also just to add to that, it's a couple of lines of code, guys. So if you want to, or I would say a few commands, right? It's not hard to.
Yes.
So if you want to experiment, you want to check it out. Like don't be put off by all the talk of P2P nodes, ZK, and all this kind of like. I mean, definitely learn about it. I'm just saying it's not like this it's not this big deal. Like if you're interested in what Rose is saying, just go to dark.fi. They have instructions up there. It's super easy to get set up. So yeah, I think thank you for coming. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, I have I got a big list of notes here. There's a lot of stuff that I covered, but also like a bunch. I mean, I could talk for ages. I think you're a really interesting person. And yeah, maybe another time in the future, maybe when DarkFi's launched, we could do another one, or get you and someone else from the DarkFi team on. I think that'd be cool, like more of a round table discussion. So yeah, thanks for coming.
Awesome.
And yeah, so everyone check out links in the description. We'll put the Agorist Journal, DarkFi, probably for the Lunapunk DAO that we didn't speak about, which is like what I'm saying. There's another bunch of things we could have talked about as well. But yeah, all the links will be in the description. Check those out, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.